There's a lot to think about in campaign for a new player, and one of those things is character skill points. Where should you put them and why? What is the best way to spend these valuable points? That is what we're going to look at here today. So, let us begin. So, melee heroes, missile heroes, magic casters, and lords all have skill points for you to allocate. The first thing to know about them is that there is no real right or wrong way to use them. It depends how you want to build that character up. That being said, there is kind of a way to go wrong with skill points, but we'll detail that in a moment. We'll start from the basics of basics though, with what skill points are and what all the skill lines really mean. Now, as you've probably found, when your character gains experience and levels up, you get good old skill points to spend as and where you see fit. And you can allocate them into 3 different coloured lines, or maybe sometimes 2 depending on the character. Could be a hero with just a yellow and blue line. But all the yellow stuff, all the character stats, this is all to do with the individual, the character that you're currently altering with skill points. For Azag, he has quite a lot with a magic skill line, a melee skill line, and his unique personal character skills. So these lines are mostly about the individual. And then you have the battle effects. This is mostly affecting the army, the units under the individual lord's command. This basically either makes certain kinds of units tougher or makes them do more damage. This is the battle skill line. And then we have the campaign effects line. This is all stuff that is going to affect you on the campaign map itself, to do with money, public order, corruption, anything you have to deal with outside of battles basically. So you simply need to decide what you want your character to do. What is going to be their role within your army or on the campaign map. The only real rule of skill points is don't waste them. They can really help you along in the early to mid campaign, and if you're not careful, you can render them absolutely useless, maybe making life harder for yourself. Well, how exactly do we waste skill points? Well, here we've got Azag, and as you see, a blank slate. I've got 10 skill points to spend. Let's say then I put some points into Gobbos. It's early campaign, Gobbos are cheap, I bring a big army of Gobbos. So therefore I put skill points into buffing up Gobbos, but now you can see I don't really have any Gobbos in my army. Take a shot every time I say Gobbos, by the way. As you can see, I've got a lot of orcs, I've got a lot of trolls, I've got a few Gobbo archers who will be benefiting from those skill points, but they're hardly going to be winning me the battles. So these skill points have become wasted because I no longer have Gobbos in my army really. If I wanted to take these points, I should have committed to a full Gobbo army to make the most of it. Or let's say I took Arda's Nails here, which buffs up pump wagons and chariots. Well, as you can see, I ain't got no pump wagons or chariots, so that isn't going to be much use for me. Unless maybe in the future I had plans to bring in lots of pump wagons and chariots. So you really need to commit to what you're choosing. In this case, having an army of orcs and trolls, I would be best off putting skill points into the big lads and the boys, because those buff up orcs and trolls, and I can change those units around a little bit. I could have some different orc units or different large units instead of trolls, or as well as trolls, but as long as I have anything that's in these 2 categories in my army, this is where I can make the most of those skill points. If I had those Gobbo skill points now, mostly useless. And the same thing with the campaign skill line. If we put points into things we never use, it's wasted skill points. So you just need to think about what you want the army to be doing. If I were to put all the points into Raider here, and then never do any raiding with Azag's army, it's wasted skill points. Those points never get used because I never do what I need to make the most of it. Same with Ravager. If I never sack settlements, if I just take them or raise them, never going to get the money out of this skill point. Another place skill points can be wasted is with casters, heroes or lords, whichever. You got a whole magic line, you can choose which spells you have. Your initial instinct might be to take every skill point in the line and just get all the spells all fully upgraded. This is kind of a waste for a couple of reasons. Number one, you don't have that many winds of magic in a single battle to use them all really anyway. And having all 6 spells on a wheel is a lot to think about in the heat of battle. I like to set my casters up with anything that buffs the magic, like Power of the War here, and then certain spells that I know I can use effectively, like Brainburster, Fist of Gork and Headbutt I generally avoid. Not that they're bad spells, but they're just not ones I use very often. I like Here We Go and Foot of Gork. Those are the 3 spells I'll take. I know how to use them effectively, so I can just stick with those. Trying to apply 2 other spells in and trying to find places to use them in a battle, it's just so much to think about. So don't feel like you have to take every single spell, just 3 or 4, maybe even just 2 will be enough. There will probably come a point where you have more skill points than you need though, so you will put them into those other spells just to use them up. But skipping some spells can be a good idea. It gets you to that arcane conduit a little bit quicker so you can increase your magic in battles rather than having a couple of extra spells that you don't use. Another way to go wrong with hero skill points is to put them in the line that you don't use. Let's say I want to use this caster in battle. He's going to be put in an army, but then I start putting skill points into the campaign line. If I never take him out of an army and run him around on the campaign map, some of these skill points are absolutely useless. Like wound here, if I'm never going to come out of the army and try to wound an enemy hero or character, then that's a wasted skill point. If you did, however, occasionally want to bring him out to try and wound a character that might be causing you problems nearby, then it's skill points well spent. But it depends how often you're going to do that as well. Another potential waste of skill points is to do with mounts. Some characters can have up to 4 mounts. If you put all the skill points into all those mounts, eventually taking the final and last and best one, all the previous skill points go to waste because you can't use those mounts anymore. You can waste up to 4 skill points before you get Deathclaw here for Karl Franz. So the best bet would be to avoid taking any other mounts until you get to the one you actually want to put the Lord on. Because it's only usually around level 16 that they can get their best mount, so it doesn't take too long. Maybe you could put points onto the first mount if you really want something early on to run him around on a basic horse, but those early game skill points could probably be much better spent. So we just need to watch out and be careful not to waste skill points by putting them in less than useful places. So how can we ensure we don't waste any skill points? Simply plan their role. The Lord, the hero, plan what you want them to do for your faction. How do you intend to use that army or that hero? Do you want them to be a more aggressive attacking raiding army that goes and pushes into enemy territory to sack and raid or to take settlements? Is it going to be an army that generally stays away from home? Or is it going to be more of a defensive army that stays back to protect the motherland? Maybe just a small army ready to protect against any incoming invaders to your currently controlled provinces. There are certain skill points that will benefit them that won't benefit more of an attacking aggressive army like we have out here. For example, points that increase growth or that reduce recruitment cost. Those aren't so useful when you're away from home. The same as putting points into raiding income increases aren't useful if you're just staying in your own lands. With lords, you also need to think about the individual themselves. Do you want to buff them up and make them a super strong solo entity, a one-man army? Perhaps making them super tanky, increasing their armor, their HP, their melee defense, and their leadership so that they are really hard to kill for the enemy. Or maybe you could make them more damage dealer, increasing their charge bonus, melee attack, and weapon strength. Perhaps you want a little bit of both, but eventually you probably will have all of both anyway. It depends how you want to get there though. And also maybe which lord it is you're buffing up. Some are naturally better damage dealers, some are naturally better tanks. Or do you want them to buff the units, and what kind of units? Do you want that full army of gobbos? Think about where you put the skill points if you want that, and if you want that in the long term. Or maybe you want an army of strong infantry and monsters. What kind of army do you want them to have? What do you want to play? What's fun for you? Maybe you want a full cav army, so then you put the skill points into anything that buffs up cav. You just need to think about the long game and decide what you want the lord or hero to do. So, it's mostly just common sense, right? Put the skill points in things that are useful to you. If you're not going to do a certain action that a skill point is buffing up, then don't bother taking that skill point. Unless maybe you've got too many skill points, and that is something that will happen. Once you reach level 20, 30, 40, whatever it is with your character, you'll find that you probably have everything you wanted from the skill points, and you have a bunch left over, and you can just throw them anywhere. So there very often does come a point where it doesn't really matter where you put them, because you'll get more than you need anyway. Also, very often, they kinda don't really matter, because you reach a point where your faction and your army is so strong that nothing can really stop you anyway, so skill points don't really matter. So don't put too much pressure on yourself to spend skill points perfectly, but it certainly can help in the early game especially to spend them wisely. Now here's a few lords and heroes in my campaigns and how I've set them up and why. Kicking it off is old Throg in a Norska campaign. He's got a very monster heavy army, and as you can see I put skill points a little bit of everywhere. A little bit yellow, a little bit red, a little bit blue. First off, a good few points in Throg's yellow line to make him a lot tougher, as he is a very strong anti-large lord that's going to do a lot of work in battles for me. And as I mentioned, my army is a lot of monsters, a lot of trolls, skin wolves, mammoths, Fimir, a monster heavy army that I'd always planned for Throg, so I put points into Frostbitten and Monsters of the North to buff all those units up. And I don't intend to change any of those units out, so that's all I need from the first part of the red skill line. For the blue skill line, I've taken some stuff that is useful for Throg being an aggressive attacking raider, like Despoiler, which gives extra income from sacking settlements. This is a great way for me to get some extra money. And also, Norse Resilience, as being away in the enemy lands all the time, replenishment is very important. Something like Serve or Die isn't that much use to Throg here because he's not ever recruiting anything. I've got my units, I try not to let them ever die in battles, and even if I do, I'll get someone else to recruit them and bring them over, rather than taking him back. So that would be a useless waste of points for Throg, who rarely needs to recruit anything. And also this one, which gives growth. Throg doesn't really stay in one place for too long, so growth isn't too much use to him. Maybe if he attacked a settlement and took it, that growth could be useful early on for building that settlement up a little bit, or that province. But this is probably more use for a defending army that's going to stay in my territory most of the time. Further down this line, Lightning Strike can be a really nice one to take. That can allow you to attack a single army and they won't get reinforcements. This, for extra recruitment, this won't get me any use again, much like the recruitment cost reduction, extra ranks for recruited units, not much use. More replenishment, that's going to be good. Upkeep reduction cost, very useful for this army because it's very expensive, so that could be a good one to go for. Obviously the appropriate buffs for monsters, and then just buffing up Throg more and more as we go as well. So you see, it's just picking those things that are going to be useful for your army and their playstyle. Here I've got a slightly different approach with Volkmar, going all in on Volkmar himself, not putting any points anywhere else really. This makes Volkmar very strong in battles, and he's actually a great support lord anyway, so he can kind of support the army even without putting points in the red line. And the benefit to this kind of building of your character, putting it all in the yellow, is that you get more freedom to move the units around in your army. I could have great swords, I could have cavalry, I could have lots of missiles. I'm not buffing anything specific up, so it's not wasted skill points. I get more flexibility in the units that I choose to put in my army. So if you're someone who likes to mix around different units, this can be a good way to go. Onto a Throg campaign where I've got a fair mixture of units in this army. A lot of monsters, some infantry, some ranged, so my skill points reflect that. I'm buffing up my range just a little bit, only got a few of those, although I'll probably put more points there as I go. Buffing up my rattlings and death globes there. And then I've got a bunch of points buffing up my plague monks. I really like plague monks as a unit. I think they're cool. I want to use them. So I'm going to make them a little bit more viable, buffing them up with those skill points. And then a whole lot of monsters, so Molder Knowledge, going to buff up all these rat ogres, all these brood horrors, everything I've got down here, making most of the units in this army much more powerful. I've also taken some of Throt's unique skills to buff up those monsters even further, so his army can be pretty formidable. But also buffing him up as well, taking some skill points to make him tougher, to make him hit a little bit harder. So mostly all about the military prowess here, building up Throt and his army. Onto a few heroes, and here I've got a Goblin Big Boss who I've decided to make a campaign-only hero. He's not going to be put in any armies. The main use of him here is cleansing corruption. I'm surrounded by vampires, there's a lot of vampire corruption going on. I need to counteract that a little bit, so I've got this hero who's just staying in my lands with cleanse corruption, trying to get all the skill points in that as he levels up. And that's the main role of him, just to cleanse the corruption, and if any characters or heroes or armies comes along, I'm going to put Assassinate and Specialist as well, Block Army, any of those useful points, so he can be effective on the campaign map. If I need someone assassinated, he can come along and do it. Most of the time though, he's going to be cleansing that corruption. I'm not going to put any points into the yellow line until I've filled up the blue line and I have nothing else to do with my skill points other than that, but his job is very simple. Now onto a caster who's embedded in Rakarth's army. So most of her skill points are going to go in the character line to buff up her personally. As you can see, I've taken a whole bunch of spells, taken all the magic stuff, avoiding those two spells that I'm not too fussed about. I'm not really going to use this spell, so I'm not going to take it unless I absolutely have to. There's other stuff that I could take which will be more useful than those two spells. I've got Flock of Doom, I know how to use that spell well. Amber Spear, I know how to use that spell well. Transformation of Kadon is always nice to have as well, there's extra manticores, so that's all I need. Getting that Arcane Conduit already so I can get extra magic in the battles, which is only going to help me out, making my caster more effective. And then I've just taken a few things along the way, anything that helps buff up the magic or make her maybe a little bit tougher, I've taken. I have taken her first mount, even though I've taken her last mount as well, the Dark Pegasus, because she is a very squishy wizard, I didn't want her in melee too much. I've also taken Spread Public Order. This is a useful passive effect. If she's in Rakarth's army and they take a settlement, she can help stabilize the public order a bit simply by being in the army. She doesn't have to go outside and be on the campaign map for that. So I've got most of the stuff I want for her. She doesn't really need anything else. If I have to take something, I might take Block Army because this can be useful. She'll have to come out the army to use it, but that can be a really strong, powerful ability to use in the right situation. But for the most part, she's got all the spells I need, and it's just helping buff that public order as well. And lastly, to a Norscan Werekin who's pretty high level and is kind of a dual role hero. He can go in an army and be part of a battle, or he can stay on the campaign map and act as an agent. Originally, I had him more as an assassin out on the campaign map looking for characters to hit, looking for armies to assault. But over time, I've started to integrate him into the army more. I think I've actually put him back in the wrong army here. Normally, I have him running around with Skinwolves, because in battle, he's very strong himself. He can do a lot of work, but he's also got these buffs that can help out nearby units to give them extra melee attack and to make them even stronger, which is normally what I team up with Skinwolves, have him running around with a pack of Skinwolves, and they go to absolute town. Although in this case, he could team up with some Berserkers, increase their melee attack, and make them do even more damage than they normally freaking do. So there's a bunch of lords and heroes and how I've set them up for their intended use. So there you go, skill points and what to do with them. Like I say, for the most part, I think it's just personal choice. There's no real right or wrong answer, only the potential wasting of skill points is where you can go wrong. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if you misplace a few skill points, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to fail the campaign, because you'll likely reach a point in the campaign where you're so strong nobody can touch you anyway. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future.